The opulent chandelier cast a warm, almost suffocating glow over the polished mahogany table, reflecting in the crystal glasses filled with expensive wine. Laughter, brittle and bright, echoed around the private dining room, a carefully orchestrated performance for Zhou Qingfeng's birthday. Qingfeng, the birthday boy, basked in the attention, a smug smile playing on his lips. He surveyed his assembled friends, a carefully curated collection of the city's young elite, each one a stepping stone on his meticulously planned path to success. He raised his glass, the gesture practiced and smooth. To another year of prosperity and good fortune, gentlemen. A chorus of cheers followed, the clinking of glasses a sharp counterpoint to the smooth jazz humming from hidden speakers. But amidst the celebratory atmosphere, a subtle undercurrent of tension began to weave its way through the room. One of Qingfeng's friends, a lanky young man with a carefully sculpted hairstyle, leaned forward, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Qingfeng, where's your lovely girlfriend tonight? Didn't think she'd miss your big day." Qingfeng's smile faltered, a flicker of something cold and hard replacing the earlier warmth. He took a slow sip of his wine, the movement deliberate, as if buying himself time. He could feel the curious gazes of his friends, their unspoken questions hanging heavy in the air. They expect her to be here, he thought, another trophy on display. The thought twisted something unpleasant in his gut. "Work," he finally said, the word clipped and short. He forced a smile back onto his face, a mask carefully constructed to hide the truth simmering beneath. "She's a doctor, you know how it is. Always on call." The lanky friend persisted, his tone edged with playful mockery. "A doctor, huh? Must be nice having someone who can patch you up after a particularly rough night out." He winked, eliciting a round of laughter from the others. Qingfeng's grip tightened around his glass. The laughter grated on his nerves, each chuckle a tiny pinprick of irritation. "They don't understand," he thought bitterly. "They don't know what it's like." The image of Weiwei, her hands stained with the grim residue of her work, flashed through his mind. He swallowed hard, the taste of the expensive wine suddenly sour on his tongue. "Actually," he said, his voice low and tight, "we're taking a break." The words felt heavy, leaden, as they left his lips. The laughter died down, replaced by a sudden, awkward silence. The lanky friend, sensing the shift in mood, cleared his throat. "A break? Everything all right?" Qingfeng forced a laugh, a hollow, brittle sound. "Just differences. Irreconcilable differences." He took another gulp of wine, the alcohol burning a path down his throat. He felt a perverse satisfaction at the shocked expressions on his friends' faces. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. Let them see that he, Zhou Qingfeng, was not bound by a woman who, "she smells," he blurted out, the words escaping before he could stop them. He felt a flush of shame rise in his cheeks, but the dam had broken, the truth spilling out in a torrent of resentment. Like a corpse. Formaldehyde, decay. Every time I get close to her, I feel like throwing up. He looked down at his hands, the manicured nails gleaming under the chandelier light. He could feel the disgust twisting his features, a visceral reaction he could no longer control. The silence that followed was heavier this time, thick with unspoken judgment. Qingfeng looked up, meeting the bewildered gazes of his friends. He saw pity in their eyes, and a flicker of something else he couldn't quite decipher. Disdain. Repulsion. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had revealed too much, exposed a vulnerability he had carefully guarded for so long. "They think I'm weak," he thought, the realization a bitter pill to swallow. "They think I'm pathetic." Later that night, the opulent restaurant a distant, hazy memory, Qingfeng sat alone in his apartment, the silence pressing down on him like a physical weight. The celebratory atmosphere of his birthday dinner felt like a cruel joke, a mocking reminder of the emptiness that gnawed at him. He poured himself another drink, the amber liquid sloshing in the glass. He closed his eyes, trying to conjure up an image of Weiwei, but all he could see were her stained hands, smell the faint, lingering scent of formaldehyde. He shuddered, a wave of nausea washing over him. It's over, he thought, a strange mix of relief and regret swirling within him. It has to be. Meanwhile, miles away, Song Weiwei stood on the balcony of Yi Wenzhou's apartment, the cool night air a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the hospital. The city lights stretched out before her, a glittering tapestry of human activity. Just hours ago, she had been hunched over a cold, lifeless form, meticulously searching for clues that could bring justice to the silent victim. Now, she was here, enveloped in an unexpected warmth, a sense of belonging she hadn't realized she craved. Yi Wenzhou stood beside her, a silent, comforting presence. He had swept into her life like a whirlwind, a force of nature that had upended her carefully constructed world. His impulsive proposal, just hours after their first meeting, had shocked her, but beneath the initial surprise, she had felt a flicker of something hopeful. He saw past the stains on her hands, past the lingering scent of death, and saw her, the woman beneath the forensic mask. The events of the evening played out in her mind, the unexpected encounter with Wenzhou, the whirlwind proposal, the confrontation with Qingfeng and his mother, the unwavering support of Wenzhou's own mother, who, despite initial reservations, had embraced her with surprising warmth. It was a dizzying sequence of events, each one more improbable than the last. She looked at Wenzhou, his profile silhouetted against the city lights. He seemed so solid, a reassuring anchor in the turbulent sea of her life. She took a deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. Perhaps, just perhaps, she had finally found a place to belong. The air in Zhou Qingfeng's apartment crackled with a forced festivity. Balloons bobbed against the ceiling, their cheerful colors mocking the tension that thrummed beneath the surface. Weiwei stood near the balcony, the city lights blurring through the glass, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere within. Qingfeng's friends, all polished and gleaming, their laughter brittle and hollow, swirled around her like brightly colored, venomous fish. The scent of expensive perfume mingled with the cloying sweetness of the birthday cake, creating a nauseating blend that made her stomach churn. She watched Qingfeng, the center of attention, his smile wide and practiced. He hadn't looked at her properly all evening. Each time their eyes met, his gaze flickered away, a mixture of guilt and annoyance flashing across his features. He's ashamed of me, she thought, the realization a cold knot in her gut. Ashamed of the faint, metallic scent that clings to me, the scent of death that follows me home from the autopsy room. She knew this was coming. The subtle digs about her profession, the veiled criticisms from his mother, the increasing distance between them, it had all been building towards this inevitable moment. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne flutes, the bubbles rising like tiny, fleeting hopes. Weiwei took one, the cold glass a stark contrast against her feverish skin. She took a sip, the sharpness of the champagne doing little to quench the dryness in her throat. Weiwei, darling, aren't you going to mingle? Qingfeng's mother materialized beside her, her smile tight, her eyes scrutinizing. These are important connections for Qingfeng's future, you know. The unspoken accusation hung heavy in the air. You, with your gruesome job, you're holding him back. Weiwei swallowed the lump in her throat. I'll join them in a moment, Auntie. Qingfeng's mother gave a curt nod and glided away, her silk dress whispering against the polished floor. Weiwei closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, trying to steady her nerves. This is it. This is the end. She found Qingfeng on the balcony, talking animatedly on his phone. His back was to her, giving her a moment to observe him, really observe him, perhaps for the last time. The sharp cut of his suit, the expensive watch glinting on his wrist, the carefully styled hair. It all felt foreign, a costume he wore to fit into a world she didn't belong to. Qingfeng, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. He turned, his smile faltering as he saw the expression in her eyes. Wei Wei, there you are. I was just, Zhou Qingfeng, she interrupted, her voice cutting through his practiced charm, let's break up. The words hung in the air, stark and final. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of disbelief, then anger. What are you talking about? He hissed, lowering his voice, glancing nervously at the party inside. We're not compatible, Wei Wei said, each word carefully enunciated. The differences between humans and animals, we are not suitable. The irony wasn't lost on her. He saw her profession as dealing with the dead, the animalistic. But it was his shallowness, his obsession with appearances, that made him less human in her eyes. His face contorted in a mixture of rage and humiliation. Don't be ridiculous, he whispered fiercely. You're just being dramatic. No, Qingfeng, Wei Wei said, her voice calm despite the turmoil inside. I'm being realistic. This isn't working. It hasn't been working for a long time. He opened his mouth to argue, but she cut him off. It's over. She turned and walked away, the weight of the past few months lifting with every step. She didn't look back. The night air was cool against her skin, a welcome contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the apartment. She walked aimlessly, the city lights a blur, her mind racing. The heartbreak was a dull ache, but beneath it, a flicker of something else began to ignite, relief. Freedom. She found herself in front of a dimly lit bar. Without thinking, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the scent of whiskey and cigarette smoke, it was a world away from Qingfeng's sterile, artificial world. She sat at the bar, the cool wood a comfort against her trembling hands. Whiskey, neat, she told the bartender. As she sipped the burning liquid, a voice beside her said, rough night? She turned to see a man she vaguely recognized. Tall, with sharp features and intelligent eyes. He held a glass of amber liquid, the ice clinking softly. It was Yi Wenzhou, the businessman she had met briefly at a charity event a few weeks prior. Something like that, she replied, a wry smile touching her lips. He raised his glass in a silent toast. To new beginnings. Wei Wei met his gaze, something in his eyes, a quiet strength and understanding, making her feel unexpectedly safe. She clinked her glass against his. To new beginnings. The words resonated, a promise whispered in the dimly lit bar, a whisper that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken hopes. The whiskey burned a path down her throat, warming her from the inside out. She hadn't known how much she needed this unexpected connection, this sense of possibility in the midst of the wreckage of her past. The night, which had begun with a suffocating sense of finality, now held the faintest glimmer of a new dawn. Sunlight, filtered through the sheer curtains, painted the room in a soft, ethereal glow. Yi Wenzhou awoke slowly, the remnants of a dream clinging to the edges of his consciousness. It was a strange dream, filled with the scent of antiseptic and a woman's low, steady voice. He shifted, the crisp linen sheets cool against his skin. The other side of the bed was empty, a faint indentation the only evidence of its recent occupant. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the lingering warmth. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He hadn't slept so soundly in years. A gentle knock on the door interrupted his reverie. Wenzhou, are you awake? His mother's voice, carefully modulated, drifted into the room. Come in, mother. She entered, her face a mask of composed concern. Beneath the surface, however, Wenzhou detected a flicker of something else, anticipation, perhaps. I have something to discuss with you, she began, her gaze carefully avoiding his. It concerns your condition. Wenzhou's jaw tightened. His condition, the unspoken, ever-present shadow that hung over his family. The inability to connect. It was a source of shame, a whispered secret he carried like a lead weight. He braced himself for another round of well-meaning but ultimately futile suggestions. "Mother, we've been over this." "No, Wonjo, this is different," she interrupted, her voice laced with an unusual urgency. "I heard of a woman, a specialist. She possesses unique traits. People say she can awaken dormant energies." Her words were carefully chosen, veiled in euphemism. But Wonjo understood. Another charlatan, another false hope. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mother, I appreciate your concern, but just hear me out," she insisted, her hand fluttering to his arm. "This woman, she's different. She works with the dead." A strange image flashed through his mind, a woman with cool, steady hands, the faint scent of formaldehyde clinging to her skin. He pushed the thought aside. "Mother, I'm not interested in some mystical cure." "She's a forensic doctor, Wonjo," his mother clarified, a hint of triumph in her voice. "Perhaps there's a scientific explanation for her abilities. It's worth exploring, isn't it?" He was about to dismiss the idea entirely when a memory, sharp and vivid, surged through him. The scent of antiseptic, the feel of soft skin against his, a jolt, electric and unexpected, ran through him. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "Last night," he began, his voice barely a whisper. He hesitated, unsure how to articulate the inexplicable. "Last night, his mother leaned forward, her eyes widening with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He closed his eyes, replaying the events of the previous night in his mind. The woman's face, framed by dark hair, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. The feel of her hand in his, the way she held his gaze without flinching. The connection. A wave of heat flushed his cheeks. He had never experienced anything like it. I was with someone," he finally admitted, the words feeling strange and unfamiliar on his tongue. His mother's breath hitched. "Who? One of those actresses again?" Her voice dripped with disapproval. "No," he said firmly. "It was Som Weiwei." A stunned silence filled the room. His mother stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. Then, a slow smile spread across her face, transforming her features. "Som Weiwei. The forensic doctor." Her voice was barely audible, laced with disbelief. Wonjo nodded, a strange sense of calm settling over him. "Yes. And mother, I asked her to marry me." The teacup in his mother's hand clattered against the saucer. Her carefully constructed composure shattered. "Marry her," she repeated, her voice rising in pitch. "But you barely know her. And her profession, I know it seems sudden," he admitted, "but I've never felt like this before. With anyone." He paused, searching for the right words to explain the unexplainable. "You said before that I was a person with a divine eye and ability to discern the true nature of things. I didn't expect to be deflowered by this woman, but it happened. And it changed everything." He could see the wheels turning in his mother's mind. The initial shock giving way to calculation. The prospect of an heir, of securing the family legacy, would outweigh any reservations about Weiwei's profession. He met her gaze, his own unwavering. "I know what I'm doing, mother. I'm going to marry her." His mother's expression shifted again, a shrewd gleam entering her eyes. "Well," she said slowly, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "This is unexpected. But perhaps it is fate. Tell me everything." "Everything." As Wonjo recounted the events of the previous night, he felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a scene unfold from a distance. The humiliation of the birthday party, the unexpected encounter with Weiwei, the impulsive proposal, it all felt surreal, like a dream. But the lingering warmth on his skin, the memory of her scent, the echo of her voice, those were undeniably real. And as he spoke, a new feeling began to blossom within him, a feeling he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Hope. The opulent silence of Yi Wonjo's home, a stark contrast to the chaotic restaurant, pressed in on Song Weiwei. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and aged wood, felt heavy, expectant. She sat on the edge of a plush cream sofa, the silk cool against her skin, yet a nervous heat prickled beneath. The whirlwind of the evening, the humiliation, the proposal, the hasty ceremony played on a loop in her mind, each replay blurring the edges of reality. Had she truly just married a man she barely knew? A man who, despite his impulsive actions, possessed an unsettling calmness that both intrigued and unnerved her. The sudden, sharp ring of the doorbell shattered the fragile quiet. Weiwei's heart leaped. Was it her family? Would they understand? Or would they see this as another example of her impulsiveness, another mark against her already unconventional life? Before she could dwell, the heavy oak door swung open, revealing not her family, but Zhou Qingfeng, his face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and fury. His mother trailed behind him, clutching her handbag like a shield, her eyes wide with shock. Song Weiwei, Qingfeng spat, his voice laced with venom, are you cursing me in a roundabout way? His words struck her like a physical blow. The accusation, so absurd, so out of touch with the hurt she felt, ignited a flicker of anger within her. Had he come here to berate her, to add insult to injury? He hadn't even asked why, hadn't bothered to understand. All he saw was a slight against his own ego. Qingfeng, his mother interjected, her voice trembling, what's the meaning of this? What's going on here? She looked from her son to Weiwei, her confusion palpable. The lavish surroundings, the sudden appearance of her son's ex-girlfriend in this unfamiliar house, it was all too much. Before Weiwei could respond, a calm, measured voice cut through the tension. Qingfeng, Yi Wonjo said, emerging from a hallway, his presence radiating an authority that instantly commanded the room. What a surprise! To what do we owe this unexpected visit? His gaze shifted briefly to Weiwei, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before returning to Qingfeng. Qingfeng's anger seemed to momentarily falter, replaced by a bewildered confusion. Yan Wenjiao is my uncle, he blurted out, the words tumbling out in a disjointed rush. His mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Weiwei felt a cold dread creep up her spine. Uncle? How could this be? The world, already spinning, tilted further off its axis. Her mind raced, struggling to process this new, unsettling information. She looked from Qingfeng to Yi Wonjo, searching for an explanation, a clue to unravel this tangled web of relationships. My uncle is coming back home soon, Qingfeng continued, a strange mix of pride and resentment twisting his features. He is now a world-renowned entrepreneur. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Weiwei understood. This was about status, about connections, about the opportunities that Yi Wonjo's return represented. Opportunities that Qingfeng, in his shallow pursuit of social climbing, had clearly been banking on. Yi Wonjo's expression remained impassive. Indeed, he said, his voice smooth, unperturbed. He turned to Qingfeng's mother, a hint of polite dismissal in his tone. Mrs. Zhou, I understand your surprise. Perhaps we can discuss this further in a more appropriate setting. However, at the moment, I would appreciate it if you could excuse us. My wife and I have some private matters to discuss. The emphasis on the word wife was subtle, yet it carried a weight that settled heavily in the room. Mrs. Zhou, still reeling from the revelation, nodded weakly, her eyes darting between her son and Yi Wonjo. She tugged at Qingfeng's sleeve, urging him towards the door. Qingfeng, however, remained rooted to the spot, his gaze fixed on Weiwei. The anger had returned, burning hotter than before. Weiwei, he pleaded, his voice cracking, don't do this. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. There was a desperation in his eyes, a flicker of genuine emotion that cut through the layers of resentment. For a moment, Wei Wei felt a pang of sympathy. He was losing everything, his carefully constructed plans crumbling around him. But then she remembered his callous words, his dismissive attitude, the way he had discarded her feelings without a second thought. The sympathy faded, replaced by a steely resolve. "Qingfeng," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "it's over. We're over. I've made my choice." The finality in her voice seemed to break something within him. He looked at her, a strange mixture of pain and resignation in his eyes, before finally allowing his mother to lead him away. The heavy oak door closed behind them, leaving a silence that felt both empty and liberating. Wei Wei turned to Yi Wenzhou, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She had just married a man she barely knew, a man who was her ex-boyfriend's uncle. It was a situation so bizarre, so improbable, that it felt like a scene from a darkly comedic play. Yet, beneath the absurdity, a strange sense of calm was beginning to settle within her. In the chaos, she had found a strange sort of clarity. She had made a choice, a reckless, impulsive choice, perhaps, but a choice nonetheless. And now, she would face the consequences, whatever they may be, with her head held high. Yi Wenzhou watched her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions and unanswered doubts. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and soft, "Are you all right?" Wei Wei looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know," she admitted, the honesty raw and vulnerable. She took a deep breath, the scent of lilies filling her lungs. The room, no longer oppressive, felt like a sanctuary, a strange, unexpected haven in the midst of the storm. She had made a leap of faith, a blind jump into the unknown. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope, a fragile ember glowing in the darkness. The opulent ballroom, moments ago buzzing with forced gaiety, now hung heavy with a suffocating silence. Zhou Qingfeng's mother stood frozen, her meticulously applied makeup unable to mask the shock that had drained the color from her face. Her perfectly coiffed hair seemed to tremble as the echo of Yi Wenzhou's words, his proposal, his defense of Wei Wei, his accusations against her own son reverberated in the sudden void. Qingfeng himself, his face a mask of contorted fury and disbelief, had stormed out, leaving a trail of whispers and startled glances in his wake. Wei Wei, caught in the eye of the storm, felt a strange detachment, as if observing the scene from a distance. Her heart, moments ago a battlefield of conflicting emotions, now felt strangely numb. "It's over," she thought, the realization settling upon her like a shroud. It's finally, truly over. The drive back to Yi Wenzhou's residence was a blur. The cityscape flashing past the car window seemed to mirror the chaotic thoughts swirling in her mind. She stole glances at Wenzhou, his profile sharp against the city lights, his expression unreadable. "What have I done?" she wondered, a tremor of uncertainty coursing through her. She had exchanged one life for another, one uncertainty for a different kind of unknown. The scent of his car, a blend of leather and something subtly masculine, filled the air, a stark contrast to the antiseptic smell that clung to her, a constant reminder of her profession, the very thing that had driven Qingfeng away. Wenzhou's mother greeted them at the door, her face a carefully composed mask of polite inquiry. Wei Wei felt her stomach clench. This was a different battleground, a different kind of scrutiny. "Wenzhou, dear," his mother began, her voice smooth as silk, yet laced with an undercurrent of steel, "perhaps Miss Song would like to freshen up after the evening's events." Wei Wei caught the subtle emphasis on events, a clear indication that the news had already reached her. "She's testing me," Wei Wei realized, her hand instinctively going to smooth down her slightly rumpled dress. "She's already assessing the damage." "Thank you," Wei Wei replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She followed a maid to a guest room, the silence of the house pressing in on her. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Wonjo, true to his word, began making arrangements for their marriage. His efficiency was both impressive and overwhelming. Wei Wei found herself caught in a current, swept along by his decisions, her own voice lost in the rush. His mother, after the initial coolness, had adopted a disconcertingly amiable facade. She showered Wei Wei with compliments, discussed wedding plans with an almost manic enthusiasm, yet Wei Wei couldn't shake the feeling that she was being studied, dissected, categorized. She felt like an insect pinned beneath a microscope, every flaw magnified, every vulnerability exposed. One afternoon, Wonjo's mother invited Wei Wei for tea. The delicate porcelain cups, the fragrant steam rising from the jasmine tea, the hushed elegance of the room, it all felt suffocatingly formal. "This tea is nothing strange," Wonjo's mother said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Wei Wei took a sip, the taste bitter on her tongue. Something felt wrong, a prickle of unease in the back of her mind. She placed the cup back on the saucer, the delicate clink echoing in the silence. "Song Wei Wei, what nonsense are you talking about? What's wrong with this tea?" Wonjo's mother's voice, though still controlled, held a sharp edge. Wei Wei met her gaze, her own eyes unwavering. "I can't explain it," she said, her voice calm despite the turmoil within, "but I know something isn't right." The faint, metallic tang on her tongue, the subtle shift in the tea's aroma, the almost imperceptible bitterness her senses, honed by years of working with the dead, screamed at her that something was amiss. Later, tests confirmed her suspicions. The tea had been laced with a slow-acting poison, undetectable to the untrained palate. The revelation sent a shockwave through the household. Wonjo's initial reaction was disbelief, followed by a cold fury that chilled Wei Wei to the bone. His mother, however, seemed strangely unperturbed, her composure unsettling. The investigation that followed revealed a conspiracy more twisted than Wei Wei could have imagined. Zhou Qingfeng, driven by a venomous blend of jealousy and resentment, had not only orchestrated the poisoning, but had also manipulated his own family, using their social aspirations and financial vulnerabilities to further his scheme. He had hoped to eliminate Wei Wei and, in the ensuing chaos, discredit Wonjo, thereby sabotaging his business and social standing. The depth of his depravity sickened Wei Wei, the betrayal cutting deeper than any romantic heartbreak. As the truth unraveled, Wonjo's mother's facade finally crumbled. The carefully constructed mask of composure shattered, revealing a mixture of shame, fear, and a surprising vulnerability. She confessed to her complicity, driven by a misguided desire to protect her family's reputation and secure her son's future. The revelation, though painful, brought a strange sense of clarity. The carefully orchestrated world of social appearances and unspoken expectations had finally cracked, exposing the raw, messy emotions beneath. In the aftermath, Wonjo drew closer to Wei Wei. The shared ordeal, the vulnerability they had both witnessed, forged a bond stronger than any fleeting attraction. He saw past the forensic doctor, past the smell of death that clung to her, and recognized the strength, the resilience, the unwavering integrity that lay beneath. He saw her not as a liability, but as an equal, a partner, a woman worthy of his respect and his love. Wei Wei, in turn, found herself drawn to his unwavering support, his quiet strength, the unexpected depth of his character. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued her began to recede, replaced by a growing sense of belonging, a sense of finally coming home. The antiseptic smell that had once been a barrier between her and the world now seemed less pervasive, replaced by the warmth of his hand in hers, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her own. The world, once a chaotic blur of conflicting emotions and hidden agendas, began to sharpen into focus, revealing a future she had never dared to imagine, a future she now embraced, hand in hand, with the man who had seen past the surface and recognized the woman within. The quiet elegance of Yi Wonjo's home was a stark contrast to the chaotic scene at the birthday party just days before. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a silent ballet against the backdrop of the city sprawling below. Wei Wei sat on the plush sofa, the soft fabric a stark contrast to the knot in her stomach. It had been a whirlwind few days, a disastrous birthday party, a shocking proposal, a terrifying near-accident, and now, this unsettling calm. Her hands, still slightly trembling, rested in her lap. She could still feel the phantom sensation of Qingfeng's hands on her, the chilling glint in his eyes. He really meant to hurt me. The realization was a cold stone in her chest. She closed her eyes, inhaling the faint scent of sandalwood that permeated the room, trying to ground herself in the present. It was a new scent, a new space, a new life. The thought felt both exhilarating and terrifying. The clicking of heels announced the arrival of Yi Wonjo's mother. Wei Wei straightened up, her heart beating a little faster. She hadn't spoken to the woman since the chaotic events of the party. She remembered the initial disapproval in her eyes, the thinly veiled disdain for her profession. Now, however, the older woman's expression was surprisingly soft, a flicker of something akin to understanding. "Wei Wei," she began, her voice gentler than Wei Wei expected. "To owe you an apology. I misjudged you." Wei Wei's surprise must have been evident on her face because the older woman gave a small, rueful smile. "I let societal expectations cloud my judgment. I should have trusted my son's instincts." Wei Wei found herself speechless. The apology was unexpected, disarming. It's all right," she finally managed, her voice a little hoarse. "Is it all right? Can I really just move past everything that happened?" The internal question echoed unanswered. "No, it's not all right," Yi Wonjo's mother countered, her voice firm. "What Qingfeng did was unforgivable. We were all blinded by his charm. We never suspected such darkness." She paused, her gaze distant. "But you," she turned back to Wei Wei, her eyes holding a newfound respect, "you saw through it. You were right about him all along." The police investigation had been swift and thorough. Security footage from the party, combined with witness testimonies, painted a damning picture of Qingfeng's premeditated attempt to harm Wei Wei. His mother, initially in denial, was now faced with the devastating truth of her son's actions. Just then, Yi Wonjo entered the room. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes deeper than usual, but his expression softened as he saw Wei Wei. He walked over and sat beside her, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. "Everything is taken care of," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "Qingfeng is in custody." Wei Wei nodded, the weight of the past few days finally beginning to lift. She looked at Wonjo, really looked at him. Beneath the polished exterior, she saw a strength, a quiet determination that had both surprised and comforted her. He had stood by her, unwavering in his support, despite the chaos and the disapproval of his own family. "He chose me." The realization warmed her from the inside out. "Wonjo," she began, hesitation clinging to her words, there's something I need to tell you." She took a deep breath, the scent of sandalwood suddenly overwhelming. "How do I tell him? How do I explain this sudden, unexpected twist?" She felt a surge of nausea, a wave of dizziness that made her grip his hand tighter. "What is it?" Wonjo's brow furrowed with concern. He noticed her sudden pallor, the way her hand trembled in his. "Wei Wei, are you all right?" She opened her mouth to speak, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. Just then, Yi Wonjo's mother gasped, her eyes widening as she looked at Wei Wei. "Dear God," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yuri, I'm pregnant," Wei Wei finally managed, the words barely a whisper. The silence that followed stretched, heavy and pregnant with unspoken emotions. Wonjo stared at her, his expression unreadable. He's going to leave me. He's going to think I trapped him. The thought was a sharp, painful stab. She braced herself for the rejection, the accusations, the inevitable unraveling of this fragile new beginning. But instead, a slow smile spread across Wonjo's face, transforming his features. Relief, wonder, and a profound joy radiated from him. Pregnant, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out, his hand gently resting on her stomach. "You're going to have a baby?" Weiwei nodded, tears blurring her vision. "I just got married yesterday," she murmured, a self-deprecating laugh escaping her lips. "This is a lot." Wonjo's mother, recovering from her initial shock, rushed forward, her arms enveloping Weiwei in a warm embrace. "Oh, my dear," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "This is wonderful news. A blessing. A true blessing." The tension that had been a constant companion for the past few days finally dissipated, replaced by a sense of cautious hope, a fragile peace. As Wonjo held her close, his hand protectively over hers on her stomach, Weiwei felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging, of acceptance, a family. The scent of sandalwood, no longer overwhelming, now felt like a comforting embrace, a promise of a new beginning, a new chapter in a life that had been unexpectedly, beautifully rewritten. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with the unknown challenges of parenthood and the lingering shadows of the past. But in that moment, held safe in Wonjo's arms, surrounded by the warmth of his family's acceptance, Weiwei felt a flicker of hope, a fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found her place in the world. The sprawling quiet of Yi Wonjo's home was a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of the birthday party. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a silent ballet in the vast, minimalist living room. Weiwei sat on the edge of a plush, cream-colored sofa, the soft fabric a stark contrast to the sterile metal of the autopsy tables she was accustomed to. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, a subtle, protective gesture. A faint, disbelieving smile touched her lips. Just hours ago, her life had been a tangled mess of heartbreak and humiliation. Now, she was married to a man she barely knew, pregnant with his child, and mistress of this palace. It felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. A shadow fell across her. Yi Wonjo's mother stood before her, a complex expression flickering across her elegant face. Weiwei's heart tightened. The older woman's disapproval at the birthday party had been palpable, a chilling wave washing over Weiwei's already fragile composure. "Weiwei," Mrs. Yi began, her voice softer than Weiwei expected, "my son sometimes speaks without restraint. He acts first and thinks later." A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through Weiwei's body. She clasped her hands together, her knuckles turning white. Was this an apology? Or a prelude to something worse? Her mind raced, replaying Wonjo's impulsive proposal, the stunned silence of the guests, Chingfeng's venomous glare. I understand," Weiwei managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Ye's gaze softened, the ice in her eyes melting slightly. "This is the welcome gift we prepared for you." A servant appeared, holding a velvet box. It was open to reveal a dazzling jade pendant, intricately carved with phoenixes, shimmering under the light. Weiwei stared at it, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over her. The gift was extravagant, almost overwhelming. Was it a peace offering? A bribe? A symbol of her new, gilded cage? She swallowed, the lump in her throat making it hard to speak. "It's beautiful," she finally managed, her voice still trembling slightly. She couldn't quite decipher the emotions swirling within the older woman's eyes. Relief? Acceptance? Perhaps a touch of calculation. "It belonged to my grandmother," Mrs. Yi said, a hint of warmth in her voice. It symbolizes good fortune and protection. May it bring you both. Later, alone in the opulent bedroom that was now hers, Wei Wei stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror. She was dressed in a silk robe, the fabric cool against her skin. She looked at her reflection, a stranger staring back at her. Was this really her life now? She touched her stomach again, a slow, deliberate gesture. A life growing inside her, a life that would forever bind her to this strange new world. A world of wealth, of secrets, and of a man she barely knew. The jade pendant, cool and smooth against her skin, felt like a weight, a reminder of the unexpected turn her life had taken. Days bled into weeks. The sprawling house, initially overwhelming, began to feel less like a gilded cage and more like a sanctuary. The staff, initially intimidating, became familiar faces, their quiet efficiency a soothing balm to Wei Wei's frayed nerves. One Zhou, surprisingly, proved to be a considerate, even gentle husband. He respected her space, her need for solitude, her unwavering dedication to her work. He would often find her in the small library he had converted into a makeshift study for her, surrounded by medical journals and textbooks. He would sit quietly beside her, watching her work, a silent presence that was somehow comforting. "What are you thinking about?" he asked one afternoon, his voice soft, breaking the silence. Wei Wei looked up, startled. "Just work," she replied, a flicker of a smile touching her lips. "You work too hard," he said, reaching out to gently brush a strand of hair away from her face. The touch was light, almost hesitant, yet it sent a shiver down her spine. "It's what I do," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's who I am." "You are more than that," he said, his gaze intense, searching. "You are my wife. And the mother of my child." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Wei Wei's heart ached with a strange mixture of gratitude and fear. She was still adjusting to this new reality, to the idea of belonging, of being cherished. It was a foreign concept, a language she was still learning to speak. One evening, a familiar figure darkened the doorway of her study. Zhou Qingfeng stood there, his face a mask of anger and resentment. "You think you've won, don't you?" he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. Wei Wei's blood ran cold. How had he gotten in? She stood up, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. One Zhou appeared behind Qingfeng, his face impassive, his eyes cold. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This isn't over, Song Wei Wei," Qingfeng hissed, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You'll regret this." One Zhou's grip tightened on Qingfeng's arm, propelling him towards the door. "I suggest you leave before I call security," he said, his voice laced with steel. After Qingfeng's unceremonious departure, Wei Wei stood trembling, the echo of his threats ringing in her ears. One Zhou turned to her, his face etched with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. Wei Wei nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She felt a wave of dizziness wash over her, and she stumbled slightly. One Zhou caught her, his arms strong and steady around her. I'm fine," she whispered, leaning against him, drawing strength from his presence. Later that night, nestled in One Zhou's arms, Wei Wei finally felt a sense of peace she hadn't realized she'd been craving. "I'm happier," she murmured, her voice barely audible, "after being with you." The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. He tightened his hold on her, his breath warm against her hair. "Me too," he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. The silence that followed was not empty, but filled with an unspoken understanding, a shared vulnerability that forged a bond stronger than any impulsive proposal or forced circumstance. The sprawling house, once a symbol of her uncertain future, now felt like a haven, a place where she could finally let down her guard, a place where she might, just might, find the happiness that had always seemed just beyond her reach. The jade pendant, cool against her skin, no longer felt like a weight, but a talisman, a symbol of hope and protection in this strange, new life she was building, brick by fragile brick.